Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jim and Shaun.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take. I'm Jim Galante. He is Shaun Gold. Shaun, another week in the books. We did a bit better this past week than we did in week one.
Yeah, at least we were even, Jim. It's not quite, the 5-0 sweep we like to have, but it was better than week one for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's start with this. Penn State, again, you and I on the wrong side of that one. Not an impressive performance by Penn State, even with a 34-0 win. I think in there's a lesson for us, Shaun, when looking at those games when there's a 40-some point spread.
It's just look the other way, I think, is the lesson to be learned there. It probably comes down to, on those spreads, they probably cover about 50% of the time, but obviously if you're betting 50% of the time, you're losing long term there. So it's a stay away type of moment for sure.
I think that is the case. And towards that end, at least on this show, we're going to stay away from Penn State Villanova for two reasons. First and foremost, the spread isn't out yet. So apparently when an FBS team plays an FCS team like Villanova, they hold off on putting out the spreads. We're probably going to get that at Friday sometime. And Shaun, the only thing I could think of for that reason is it a gambling risk? When you have an FBS team playing FCS team like Villanova, might the FCS team be considered more vulnerable in that situation? That's all I could think of for the reason why.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I've never really thought of it before, and then was shocked, looking last night and this morning for the Penn State spread to see nothing there. So, betting is growing and it's becoming, as much more entertainment is coming, it's also becoming a problem. And we've seen players get in trouble and coaches get in trouble. So it could definitely be right along those lines is why they don't release that spread.
And perhaps more importantly, it should be just the lesson learned. You stay away from games where there's a 40-some point spread. So let's get into the schedule. Some interesting games this week coming up. But I also want to ask you one more question before we start hitting these games, because it was the overriding question for me in going through these games. A couple of teams, let me throw out there Clemson, let me throw out there South Florida. We thought Clemson was a certain team coming into the season. They lost game one at home to LSU. Not a terrible loss, but a loss when they were favored in that game. Then against Troy, they were down double digits at halftime. Mad scramble to come back to win that game. My question, Shaun, and South Florida, by the way, two big wins, upsets. They have two wins over top 25 teams, Boise State and then Florida they upset in week two. My question is, how much do you balance what you've seen in such a small sample size, two games, versus what we thought of those teams coming in? In other words, our first game is Clemson at Georgia Tech. Clemson is still a 3.5-point favorite. Are they the team we thought they were coming into the season, or are they the team that has a loss and a major struggle in game two?
It's an impossible answer to give to that question, Jim. And you know what? I think my takeaway with Clemson right now, especially, is this whole entire season, they may be one of those teams where they can lose to anyone on any given week, but they can also beat anyone on any given week. And if Clemson were to have a major game, let's say a playoff game against an Ohio State or a Georgia, they have a shot to win that game if they truly play their best. Like, we know what this offense is capable of. And then we just know the history of Dabo Swinney being a head coach. He's won big games. And I think Clemson's a team where if they're truly at their best, they can hang with anybody in the country. But kind of similar to almost how Alabama was last year, Alabama theoretically could have beaten anybody if they played their absolute best, but they didn't always do that. And then it ended up costing them a trip to the playoffs. And I think that's the exact same thing that Clemson is this week. So when I look at this game against Georgia Tech, we've seen Georgia Tech play teams really, really tough, the past couple of years, and this program's getting better and better at Georgia Tech. But I have to fall back on Clemson here. I think they know that their back is against the wall right now, and the ranking committee and the college football playoff committee is not looking at them in good light after a week 1 loss, and then really what should have been a loss to Troy, which could have actually derailed their season pretty hard if they did lose that game. So I think Clemson's going to be able to say, look, we're better than this. We got to show that this week. So I don't love this spread at the 3.5. We've talked about we'd rather see that be at 2.5 than 3.5. But I like Clemson to get here. If they play their best, this is not a game.
I'm taking Clemson also for similar reasons. I'm very high on Georgia Tech. I like the coach. I like the quarterback. I think he's a winner. They're playing this game at home. So those are the arguments for Georgia Tech. Clemson, I think you hit it. Their back's against the wall. They cannot afford to lose this game. It's a conference game also. But most importantly, they got to get back on track. I'm going with Clemson also in this one, Shaun. All right, next up, we have Georgia at Tennessee. Georgia is a 3.5-point favorite. There's your half point again, Shaun. And this is start of league play. This is the kind of game the Southeast Conference says, this is why we're the best conference in the country. You have games in conference like this one. Huge game there, Shaun.
Completely agree. This is going to be a great game to watch. And, it's hard to get a great read on Georgia or Tennessee right now. Tennessee had put up 72 points last week, but in a completely meaningless game. So does that really teach us what Tennessee is this season? And I think I'm still trying to figure out both of these teams. But where I kind of hang with this game, Jim, is I think there's levels to the SEC, and I think Georgia's on a different level than what Tennessee is this year. I think Tennessee, they had their chances last year to, be a team that could potentially win it all. I don't think that's this year for Tennessee. So I think Georgia still has a lot to show, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 10-point win from Georgia. So I'm going with Georgia minus 3.5 on the road.
That's a pretty good call. And this is my argument inside my head when picking this game, Shaun, is that I feel like last year we saw Georgia and Alabama come back to the pack. It's not like it was for the previous decade or so where those two teams were superior, not just to the rest of the Southeast Conference, but pretty much the rest of the country. They were at a different level. So now, did we learn, at least starting last year, not quite the case anymore? But I'm with you. I'm not sure that this Tennessee team is ready for that prime time yet. So I'm also going with Georgia. I'm not over enthusiastic about that pick, but I still think Georgia is still a step ahead of Tennessee, even though it's being played at Tennessee. I'm sure the home crowd will be going crazy, but I look for Georgia in the end to handle it, even though, like you, I hate that extra half point. All right, next up, South Florida at Miami. South Florida, again, they are the opposite of Clemson, but that same argument. Are they who we thought they were going into the season, Shaun, or are they the team that beat two top 25 teams, Boise State and Florida? Or did those two games tell us more about Boise State and Florida than it did about South Florida? This game is at Miami. Miami is a 17.5-point pick here.
This game is so tough. I think one of the hardest games on the slate this week, and I've gone back and forth on what I think. Do I think that South Florida is really as good as they are, and like you said, or were Boise State and Florida really that good? Or is it saying that both of those programs are in a down year? And I think that definitely could be the case. At first when I looked at this, I thought, hey, South Florida, they've had 2 great weeks. They've got to come back down to earth. And I was going to say, I'm confident in Miami here, like what Carson Beck's doing. I think this team's pretty good. But Jim, I just, for whatever reason, I cannot trust Miami fully here. And I think South Florida, one, could end up actually being a pretty good team. And two, they don't have to win this game, but lose by less than 18 points here. And I think they can do that. I think they can carry their momentum into this matchup and not get ahead of themselves and know, hey, we've got a great opportunity. We've been this Cinderella story, but we can get blown out on any given day too. So I think they'll be ready enough for this game to not necessarily win the game, but to cover this spread.
I had that same argument in my head, but I also have the teams will come back to reality. Clemson underperformed the first two games. I think they'll get back to who they really are and beat Georgia Tech on the road. Miami at South Florida, I get the feeling that Florida game was the highlight of their season. Time for them to come back down to earth. I look at Miami trying to make a statement here. They're looking at the rankings. They already have the huge win early against Notre Dame. That's a couple weeks ago now. Now there won't be that letdown in this one. I'm going Miami in this one. Not crazy about 17 and a half points, but I'm going with Miami on this one. All right, next up, it's Texas A&M at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is the 7-point favorite on this one. Again, Notre Dame had an unusual early bye week in the season to lick their wounds after that loss to Miami. What do you think here, Shaun?
I'm glad you brought up that early bye week because, Jim, I actually hate that for them here. I think it's such a weird time to get a bye week. You play one game, then you have a week off. You've just had however many weeks off since the college football playoffs, and then you play one game and get a week off. I really just don't like that timeline. I think Texas A&M is going to play them very tough. I think there's a shot that Texas A&M can win this game. I think if Texas A&M can just commit to stopping the run, they can win this game. And I'm not saying that they're going to shut down Notre Dame's, rushing attack, which is obviously an elite one in the country. But I think Texas A&M is going to keep this thing close. And, Notre Dame could come out of this bye week a little rusty because they just haven't played that much football this year. And that was my deciding factor in this, is that I don't think the bye week was good for them right then. I think they wanted to get their shot to revenge a week one loss in week two, and they didn't get that opportunity. Meanwhile, Texas A&M has worked out some kinks in their first two games, and I think they're going to be ready for this. So I like Texas A&M +7 in this.
I'm with you on this. I also have Texas A&M. I think that Notre Dame, we're looking at the fact that a year ago they made it to the national championship game. Is that who they are? It's a new season, new year. I'm not sold on Notre Dame yet, okay? I'm not. I'll take the points. I'll take Texas A&M in this one also. And finally, Shaun, we have Florida at LSU. Florida coming off the terrible loss to South Florida. LSU, remember, they had the big win on the road against Clemson. It's a 9.5-point spread. LSU favored.
I really like LSU this year, and we've talked about that when we had them in our week one picks. 9.5 points, though, is a little too much for my liking here. And I know, people are down on Florida. They just lost to South Florida, but the Gators have to want to bounce back this week. And I think LSU wins this game. I think they're a better team, but I don't think it's going to be easy. So this Florida Gator team still has some bite in them, Jim. I like them +9.5, even though I like LSU so much more as a team. I just think when it comes to this spread, Florida's going to be playing for some pride, and I think they'll be able to cover.
I'm going the other way. I'm going with LSU. I think LSU, there are some folks who think this is a national championship caliber team. They're at home. Florida's a bit down. I think Florida's going to want to show not just that they could beat Florida, but that they can own them, blow them out, double-digit win. I'm going with LSU in this one, Shaun. So we've got a couple differences in games here. A lot of fun this week. Very good games. We'll see what happens in week 3.
Can't wait for it. It's been an exciting start to the season, and it's only going to get better from here on out.
It will. All right. Thank you, Shaun. Thank all of you for tuning in. Make sure you join us next week on Shauns Take.
Keystone Sports Network.